First thing is like over the phone is hard for him to understand, so he's not comfortable doing that without somebody to translate. And he's working as well. So he's like, I wish I found somebody to do it. And then
we kind of missed him. I don't know if like. I don't know if he was just there's actually one of
because he did the because like he did the interview like for I don't know how he did the interview with Kevin, you know, because I think it was through the deck. But I think he also was going, his phone was going crazy, you know, everybody was texting him, and I think he probably just turned it off, but that also, I think he was.
Hey, good morning, this is Assistant.
It was hard for him, it was like, I can't, sometimes
Hey, good morning, this is
just turned off.
I'm
Let
assuming
me
he's
just
kind
get
of
Jennifer
out
for you. You're on the speakerphone with me.
A message before him, because he was answering me, and then I started texting him, and then I asked Anna, because she trains there. She trained in Albania sometimes, she's not doing that all the time, and she was like, I didn't go to the gym yet, but if I go, I'll let him know. Because,
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this phone unmuted for a while, and then I'll let you all know that it's going to be important, and I'll let you know that it's going to be awesome.
I don't know, okay, thank you. Just talk about that. But, in Portuguese, it's just, it doesn't get me. You can't be like, do that, do this, do that. It says whatever you want. He's mad, but I think he's also mad because Lorenzo left and he doesn't do anything. So Dina just calls the guy all the time and doesn't talk to him because I ask him. And he's more mad about the way that you're treating him. Because he's like, I got hurt in the first fight. It was not my fault that I got hurt.
To begin recording your conference, press 1. To cancel, please stand by while your recording connection is established. To cancel the recording, press
not
star
promise
2.
me that you know, don't tell me you were going to, because the thing was like, they called him one day before Saturday night. They called it then. But I was like, fighting against the yes. It was about my color.
The conference is now listen only.
And then I think then I said, I'll put my chest up. And then introducing that
You good?
that was the next one for our conference and all good fight was to so they were like, so he told me was like, you either going to fight McGregor or you're going to fight somebody else for the fight.
So you know that small fight that is one year on Jason's piece. It's long, so it's
So that was the issue with them, you know, it was like they don't really believe
It's always been like that. You know, I mean, I know in most cases it's like a big deal, but flat in line, their fighters.
it was like
I always wanted to talk to you.
so I think that was just and I just really because he was going to face that regular higher. But then he lost, so he was to fight again and we did the title. And it's like that because everybody comes from the like, and then
Jake, this is not in the battery. You're on an open phone right now. How are you doing? So just waiting for the listeners to listen. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm going to put you back on the spot.
What is Anderson's, do you know what Anderson's
yeah, when it was to do
Good morning, Sam. This is Myra. So you are on the phone, so you
I think you can that's
maybe there's something.
it's also I think it's more about like maybe you know something or like
You're welcome. You're going to go back on this morning.
because it's like the thing is like he doesn't have a lot of money, you know. His wife was like, you know,
That's possible.
you know, you're like 28, 29 years old. What the fuck are you doing? She doesn't want him to retire now because, you know, at least they, I don't know, really like I think it's time for him to talk to somebody because he hasn't reached out to him yet.
Thanks. Thank you.
And the guy even told me, like, I understand that this is like the promotion for the fight, like this champion against champion, because a lot of people don't even know how it is. Yeah, this is, but they could just come because it's like 7 to 8. Maybe you should do this. They didn't. I hope he reconsiders because, you know, I'm worried. I want to have a job. And, but the Brazilians going down, all of them don't have like a big star.
Their TV deal with Global is, when is that?
I think 2022 or something.
So it's not.
Yeah, they have one until 2020. I don't really know because they have the open channel and the closed channel. Like, it has like 4 more years or something. Oh, nice. But they can change everything. Like they're not doing tough anymore. The fights in Brazil are terrible. The fights are terrible. They can't sell that. They just, Giovanni just resigned. And I think they are trying to unite the office for South America, like in Brazil, to make them work with other shows, to keep that open. But like 2 or 3 months per year, like why they switch to an office in Brazil? With like Cyborg fighting the main event, so like that she doesn't know that nobody knows. Or, they don't know fighting Ryan Bader. They're not selling it. So I don't know. I just hope they do something better. They do everything wrong. Almost supposed to be like the next star. And then they just, you know, I don't know. They're supposed to be for like, even Brasilia, you know. Brasilia is fighting in São Paulo, but she's not a good star. It's just more known here than in Brazil. Because of Tough. Like, the way they did Tough was here. They So was not the open channel on the Rafael dos Anjos also, like, they didn't promote him in Brazil. Even Verdun, like, that he's older, but, you know, he speaks Portuguese, English, and Spanish. He's, like, very charismatic. They don't really work the fighters there, so I was just, like, shocked that, you know, they don't try to promote the fighters better.
Yeah, maybe they took it for granted that like it just blew up when it did, and they're like, oh, I love it.
Yeah, because the Brazilians were winning historically, like, oh, good. But then, like, they're older now, even Vitor, like, he's still on the club this weekend. There's no way he can keep fighting. I don't know what's going on.
Test.
Good morning, everyone on the telephone. We are about to begin shortly. This is Nara Phillips with the Nevada Athletic Commission. Please stand by. Everyone is on listen-only mode now until we remove it for public comment or unless the commission is asked to speak with you.
Appreciate it.
We are ready. When you are.
Yes, sir. Yes, Janet. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Today is October 10th, 2016 at 9 a.m. in room 2450 of the Grant Sawyer Building. I'd like to call the meeting to order and do a roll call. Commissioner Amatino? Here. Commissioner Aguilar? Here. Commissioner Martin?
Here?
Commissioner Limbaugh?
Here.
Okay, great. Everybody is present. Before we get into public comment, Commissioner Limbaugh.
Would encourage anyone who is an applicant or a licensee to participate in the brain health study that is being conducted by the Rulo Institute and in conjunction with the Nevada Athletic Commission. So if you have any questions concerning that, please feel free to see any of us afterwards or to pick up the written materials on file in the Athletic Commission office hours.
Thank you, Commissioner Limbaugh. I'd also like to, for the record, put on, or before public comment, remind the public as well as the commissioners that the effective date of the new regulations is September 9th, 2016. So when looking at any of the actions that are before us, we need to keep in mind the date of the new rules and when they came into effect versus actions that were prior to that. So therefore, moving forward, any public comment in the room?
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Be any public comment in the room? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the phone? Okay, great.
The conference is now in listen-only mode.
Item D, the minutes. Do we have a motion for approval of the minutes of September 29th, 2016?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. On to E, consent agenda.
Motion to approve?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Item F, new business. Item 1, selection of officials and setting of fees to work the November 5th, 2016, the Thomas and Mack for the WBO welterweight title between Jesse Vargas and Manny Pacquiao. Director Bennett.
Yes, Chairman, for the sake of brevity, I'll read, it's okay with you, all the judges, the referees and the ringside physicians once, and then make my recommendations accordingly.
Excellent.
Thank you. Referees to be considered for the Jesse Vargas versus Manny Pacquiao fight: Kenny Ballas, Robert Bird, Vic Draculich, Russell Mora, Jay Nady, Tony Weeks, Mark Nelson, and Benji Estevez Jr. Judges to be considered: Adley Bird, Eric Cheek, Bert Clemens, Tim Cheatham, Robert Hoyle, Patricia Morris-Jarman, Dave Moretti, Ricardo Ocasio, Glenn Trowbridge, Glenn Feldman, John McKay, Don Trella, Steve Weisfeld, Kermit Ballas, and Max DeLuca. Ringside physicians to be considered: Doctors Stephen Brown, Al Capana, Jay Coates, Michael Enrico, Joseph Heflin, Brad Lee, Raimondo Leone, Vicky Mazzarano, Anthony Rosaroli, David Watson, and Damon Zavala. Recommendations for the referee, chairman would be Kenny Ballas. And recommendations for the judges would be Dave Moretti, Glenn Trowbridge, and Glenn Feldman. The ringside physicians, the lead physician would be Dr. Jay Coates. Second is Anthony Rosaroli. Third, Al Capana and David Watson.
Okay, is there any question from the commissioners or any question from the camps? Okay, entertain a motion.
I would move for approval of the recommendation of the executive director.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Motion for. It was free. Yeah.
No.
No, it's I think it's TBD.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, item number 2, selection of officials and setting of fees to work the November 5th, 2016 event at the Thomas and Mack Center for the WBO Junior Featherweight between Nonito Donaire and Jesse Magdaleno.
Referee recommended Tony Weeks. Judges recommended Bert Clemens, Steve Weisfeld, and Adley Berg.
Physicians?
The physicians,
Same?
the same, sir.
Okay. Okay, great. Do you have a motion?
Motion to approve?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Director Bennett, why don't we have the fees? Why don't we have them already determined?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Avancini, I couldn't hear you.
Well, why are the fees for the referee and judges not determined at this point?
We didn't get them from the sanctioning bodies as of this morning, or as of Friday. But they will be added, hopefully by the close of business today.
If it pleases the commission, I guess Executive Director Bennett and myself can move forward with those unless we see anything out of the ordinary. We would maybe have to call a special meeting if we need to.
Very good, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, new business, selection of officials and setting of fees to work the November 5th, 2016 Thomas and Mack for the WBO featherweight title between Oscar Valdez and Hiroshige Osawa for possible action. Executive Director Bennett?
Yes, referee recommended Vic Draculich. Judges recommended John McKay, Max DeLuca, and Patricia Morse-Jarman. Ringside physicians stay the same.
Okay, motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Item 4, selection of officials and setting of fees to work November 5th, 2016 at Thomas and Mack for the WBO International Flyweight between Chao Xie-ming and Guan Pitchett, Wan Song Chai Jim. Did I do that pretty good? That's awesome.
Very nice, Chairman.
Thank you. Getting better.
Referee recommended Russell Mora, and judges recommended Don Trella, Tim Cheatham, and Robert Hoyle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to approve?
Second?
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, item number 5. Request by Brock Lesnar for a continuance of the hearing in the disciplinary complaint filed on September 6th, 2016.
Motion to approve continuance?
One of the inquiries that I have concerning this motion to continue deals with whether or not that Mr. Jacobs is admitted in Nevada and if not, if he's associated with Nevada Council. Is Mr. Jacobs perchance on the line?
Yes, and let me unmute his
application for the Nevada State Athletic Commission. I'm sorry?
Please go ahead, Mr. Jacobs.
I was just saying if there's an application for Mr. Prohack BJ that I can submit, I'm happy to do so.
One of the things, Mr. Chairman, is that I looked at whether or not that we need to do this, and I think that under the Nevada rules of practice that guide the admission then of attorneys here in Nevada, that any of the out-of-state attorneys do need to associate with the Nevada Council, and that they don't have the privilege by which then to practice here without Nevada association.
Okay, are there any, since all of the rest of you are attorneys, is there anybody that disagrees with that, so we can?
Yeah, it just as a, given the fact that we're an administrative hearing, does that change the process in which, I know we've gone through this in the past, and it's pretty extensive for somebody to, one, get pro hoc vice, and then the additional cost to the fighter to associate with local counsel. I know in the past, we've been able to allow people to practice before us and give a variance of some sort. Is that correct?
I guess that would be a question for me. I can look into it and get you an answer on that, on what the rules and requirements are for admin hearings and outside counsel, or counsel from out of the state.
Given, I mean, we are an administrative hearing, the fact that the one who burdens the cost of association with local counsel and then the process to file for pro hoc vice is substantial sometimes, and that just penalizes the fighter even more, and so I just want to make it as easy to use as possible, if that makes sense.
And is it okay if I get back to you on that, or would you like an answer?
I'll leave it up to Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Are you okay with that, Commissioner Lovell?
I am, and I'm not trying to increase the burden as far as on any of the fighters. In fact, I've always been a proponent of trying to decrease the burden upon fighters. But from my perspective, I don't know that we have the power by which to weigh that because they're not our rules. And so therefore, I do appreciate the Attorney General looking into that and giving us guidance on the matter. I don't think that we ever have formally looked into this in the past.
Yeah, I think the Attorney General should look into this and advise Mr. Jacobs and any other attorney that's from out of state on what they will need to do or what will be required on the hearing date to be here, or whatever rules need to be followed, or if other local counsel needs to be present, then we'll leave that up to your determination.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Jacobs? Or any other questions on item number 5 concerning Brock Lesnar and the continuance?
So I would second the motion that was made by Commissioner Adel.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, motion passes unanimously. Number 6, request by John Jones for continuance of the hearing of the disciplinary complaint filed on September 6th.
Motion to approve?
I've got one comment prior to, as far as ruling, as far as on any of the motion or taking a second on this. In the previous matter, there was the good cause that had been articulated for the continuance, that Mr. Lesnar had needed more time to do the testing of the supplements. If I understand this request, that Mr. Jacobs is articulating the good cause as only that USADA has not held their hearing on this matter. And I don't think it is good precedent for us on a going forward basis to only follow USADA's hearing. And I don't think that we are in some type of a administrative process whereby that we let USADA set the stage or dictate what the potential punishment may be, because we independently review and evaluate then whether or not that these fighters have complied then with our anti-doping standards. Now, I know from a practical standpoint, because of the request that's been made, and we do not have the materials that effectively that this continuance should be granted, but I do not think that this is a good cause for a grant of a continuance.
Mr. Chairman? Yep. I agree with Commissioner Lundvall. The argument presented in the letter is one that I think we should not consider as to our process. However, I think in the past we've been pretty lenient in granting continuances, so I would suggest we continue with that process.
I would would second that motion.
Noting the, yeah.
And I would second that motion as far as with those comments, with the recognition that at least on these materials that we don't have enough by which to go forward today, and therefore we need to grant continuance, but that we should debate possibly at some point in the future as to whether or not that this should be or is good content for continuance, because I don't think that it is.
So that's a motion and a second?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, motion passes unanimously.
Commissioner Lombard, or Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Should the minutes note that the motion was based on the fact that we've been lenient on continuances in the past, but are objecting to the actual reasoning in the letter?
The motion, or the action can reflect that.
Thank you.
Item number 7, request by Nate Diaz for continuance of the hearing of the disciplinary complaint filed on September 6, 2016.
Motion to approve?
A motion to approve and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Motion passes unanimously. Item number 8, hearing of a disciplinary complaint against mixed martial artist Conor McGregor for possible action. Good morning, please state your name for the record, please.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Jason Gunnell on behalf of the Attorney General's Office and the Executive Director, Bob Bennett.
Mr. Bennett, Chairman, Commissioners, Jennifer Goldstein, Comparative Sports, on behalf of the respondent, Conor McGregor.
Real quick, and Naira, we do have Mr. McGregor on the phone?
We do, and his line is unmuted now.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. McGregor.
Oh, good evening. I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
The disciplinary complaint against Mr. Conor McGregor arises out of an incident that occurred at a pre-flight press conference on August 17, 2016 in Las Vegas, Nevada for UFC 202. The complaint alleges that during the press conference, Mr. McGregor threw one or more items towards Mr. Diaz, directed one or more profane statements towards Mr. Diaz, and made one or more obscene gestures towards Mr. Diaz. The petitioner has provided the commissioners with the following background information. Proposed Exhibit 1, which is notice of hearing, notice of disciplinary complaint, and notice of temporary suspension. Proposed Exhibit number 2, which is an affidavit of Robert Bennett. Proposed Exhibit number 3 is the application for unlicensed combatants, Mr. Conor McGregor's license. Proposed Exhibit number 4 is a notice of self-authenticating evidence, which we intend to show 4 YouTube videos later on in our presentation. Proposed Exhibit number 5 is an affidavit of Deborah Truman. Proposed Exhibit number 6 is an email from Ms. Deborah Truman that the notice had been provided to Respondents Council. And proposed Exhibit number 7 is notice of introduction of affidavit. Mr. Chairman, at this time, we would have proposed Exhibits 1 through 7 admitted into evidence.
So admitted.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, at this time, I'd like to publish the videos to the commission.
Okay.
So these are off of proposed Exhibit number 4. We'll go ahead and watch those 4 videos. Show the first one.
Shut your fucking mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Now one of you will do nothing. Get the out of here. Get the out of here. You.
That's all right. Hey, Connor, don't go. Connor.
first video, go ahead and publish the second video.
And I guess, Conor, would you feel any obligation to give him a rematch relatively quickly, you know, just based upon the fact that you were able to get one with him right away?
The way it all panned out, I've got other business to handle after this fight, but make no mistake, it will be a trilogy fight down the line. It won't be straight away, but we will do it 3 times, 100%. Your whole team, little crackhead SS. You'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Shut your fucking mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do fucking nothing. Now one of you'll do nothing. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Fuck you.
That's all right. Hey, Conor, don't throw those fucking. Yeah, Conor. That's a wrap.
And publish the third video.
Relatively quickly, you know, just based upon the fact that you were able to get one with him right away.
The way it all panned out, I've got other business to handle after this fight, but make no mistake, it will be a trilogy fight down the line. It won't be straight away, but we will do it 3 times, 100%. Your whole team, little crackhead SS. You'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Shut your fucking mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do fucking nothing. Now what are you gonna do nothing? Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Fuck you.
Finally, I'd like to show the fourth video. The fourth video is actually the entire conference, and with the permission of the chairman, I'd like to start the first, fast forward, and then show some relevant scenes, and then fast forward to the end.
Go ahead.
So we're starting without him. Yes, start respecting people's time, man. Yours, theirs, mine, theirs, David Copperfield's, everybody's. We have only so much time in this room. Listen, we're having a press conference here. If it's over before he gets here, then it's over. Do you have any questions?
So, fast forward to 6:45.
Yeah, I'm late.
Is he ready to ride?
175, 200 pounds, something like that.
You also said that the game is going to change if you win. You told that to Yahoo Sports. What do you mean by that?
It's already changing.
How so? Can you elaborate on that?
People follow the leader, they know how to do things.
Went ahead for the record and paused the video at 7 minutes, 13 seconds. Go ahead and fast forward it to 9 minutes and 45 seconds.
To give him a rematch relatively quickly, you know, just based upon the fact that you were able to get one with him right away?
The way it all panned out, I've got other business to handle after this fight, but make no mistake, it will be a trilogy fight down the line. It won't be straight away, but we will do it 3 times, 100%. Your whole team, little crackhead SS. You'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Shut your fucking mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do fucking nothing. Not one of you will do nothing. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Fuck you.
That's all right. Hey, Conor, don't throw those fucking... Yeah, Conor.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd like to offer those 4 videos and evidence.
So admitted.
And we have no further evidence at this time. Would you like to hear my argument now, or wait for defense, or?
Do you think your argument can be better than the video? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, based upon the evidence that was presented for you, and what we watched was a disrespect to the Commission, it was disrespect to the sports, and the nature and the manner that Mr. McGregor acted. And for that, and petitioner requests that the respondent be fined $25,000, be given 25 hours community service. In addition, try to mitigate some of this behavior and this activity. We also recommend that he receive some sort of media training, 5 hours, going into words trying to address the actual problem in this situation, see if we can actually help him get through this, and for the benefit of the sport, benefit for the commission, try to have a press conferences and things like this where they won't happen in the future.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from any of the commissioners? Okay. Okay. Goldstein.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, what I'd like to do now is offer a video compilation which syncs the videos that Mr. Gunnell just presented. And I think what I'd like to do is preface it by saying that we don't offer it as an excuse or justification, but rather to afford you the full spectrum view. The single views of each of these cameras doesn't afford you the 360 degree of what happened. And I think the timeline in this is important, again, not as a defense, but as context for what transpired. So with that, I'd like to offer what I'd ask also is, you watch it the first time without my commentary, and then if you have any questions, we can go back. But you'll see that with this compilation, you're able to see what's transpiring on the stage. And
Make no mistake, it will be a trilogy fight down the line. It won't be straight away, but we will do it 3 times, 100%. Your whole team, little crackhead SS. do nothing. You'll do nothing. Shut your fucking mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do fucking nothing. Now, what is you do nothing? Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Fuck you.
Sorry guys, see you Saturday.
When you see the videos laid out together, when you see them synced, what you see is that although Conor's actions can't be defended, he wasn't the first to throw. What you see is that Nate actually walks off stage with the bottle in his hand. When he walks to the back of the room, he takes the bottle, he puts it in his back pocket. There's other bottles that are apparently either taken or removed by the rest of the people of his supporters coming with him. What I think you'll also see is that Conor wasn't the first one to curse, and he certainly wasn't the first one to raise his middle finger. The bottles coming back at Nate initially, the first two bottles, they come from the audience, not from Conor. Nate, or somebody from Nate's group, then throws another bottle, at which point and only then does Conor stand up and get a bottle, and does he throw it back? And again, we don't offer this as an excuse, but we want you to understand the context in which it happened. Bottles were being thrown at him twice. Bottles being thrown at Nate were not coming from Conor initially, and nor were they coming, by the way, from anybody whom we know to be affiliated with Conor. Then he stood up, and only then did he stand up and did he throw the bottle. You know, we are very mindful of this commission's being tasked with protecting the image of the sport. We're very mindful of the legislative intent behind the NAC 467.885 that brings us before you. We'd like to propose a different form of discipline, a non-traditional form of discipline, and we appreciate Mr. Gunnell's offer of $20,000, $25,000, and the community service, but we think we can do something better, and we think we can do something that would better further the commission's intent, and we think we can do something that would better and further the legislative intent, and what we'd offer is for the commission to work with Conor to create an anti-bullying campaign. And we know that that's something through prior hearings before the commission that's been something that's important to you. And we think that rather than just imposing the traditional discipline, if we were to capitalize on this opportunity to put forward a better step, to remedy some of the damage that may have been done to the image, that's a far more potent approach. And we think that that's something that we'd like for the commission to consider as you hear from Mr. McGregor, who's available now. And I respectfully ask you to ask him any questions that you may have, and thank you.
Before we go to Mr. McGregor, I've got a couple of questions concerning the answer that you have filed into the complaint.
Please.
You've got a number of affirmative defenses, and in particular, affirmative defenses 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8, in essence, are defenses that put the commission's conduct at issue. It's estoppel, it's ratification, it's acquiescence, it's equitable estoppel. And what I'm trying to do is to understand what the foundation to those affirmative defenses are, and if in fact you're advancing those affirmative defenses.
Yes, Commissioner, we did preserve all of our affirmative defenses in case we needed to seek the court's assistance if you were suspended. And he's fighting on November 12th in New York, and we understand that you have a reciprocal relationship with the commission there. Had it been, or if it turns out to be the commission's decision to suspend him, we would have to take steps to try to remedy that. And so the waiver, estoppel, et cetera, issues that we did raise as affirmative defenses, we raised because we think that the allegations that were raised, for instance, the cursing, the raising of his middle finger, et cetera, are all things that happen regularly. And they happen, unfortunately, in this sport, not only by fighters, but other folks affiliated directly with various promotions and the industry in general. And what we would respectfully argue is that to some extent, and again, we're not defending the conduct, but to some extent, bringing that up now as an accusation in favor of discipline has been waived because it wasn't brought up in other instances.
Question then for you, because what I understand that you to be saying is this, is because the commission has not disciplined other athletes for using coarse language or using gestures that are equally as coarse, is that you believe that that constitutes a ratification or a waiver or some type of estoppel. Is that correct?
I believe that if that factors into the discipline imposed upon him, and if that becomes part of what would cause him to be suspended, then yes, we would seek to have that decision reviewed because we need him to be able to fight. We need him to not be suspended.
And if in fact the use of coarse language or coarse gestures is not the foundation for the imposition, then those affirmative defenses would have no applicability. Would you agree with that?
My understanding, as far as I'm aware, as I sit here today, I don't know of other instances where the throwing has occurred, other than Mr. Cormier throwing his shoe. And so, in that regard, I don't know that those defenses would apply.
Thank you.
Let me follow up on that. So as to affirmative defense 10 and 11, it's self-defense and defense of others. What I heard you say today, however, is that there is no excuse, there is no defense for the conduct. So are you asserting those affirmative defenses or not?
We are reserving our rights on those defenses, correct?
So are you asserting them?
Transpired.
But are you asserting them today?
We are maintaining them, yes.
What is the factual basis for the assertion of self-defense?
That there was more than one bottle being thrown at Mr. McGregor.
Anything beyond that?
Well, and the defense of others would be the audience members, including the significant others who were there.
Where's the evidence of that?
On the tape. The evidence of that they were being thrown in.
Who's in the audience?
Oh, of the people in the audience who were being hit by the bottles, yes. I'm sorry.
Of who was in the audience, there's no evidence as we sit now, correct?
Well, I disagree. If you watch the videos with where the bottles are ending up, the vast majority of them don't end up onto the stage.
Correct.
They end up in the audience of somebody, on somebody's
You're
behalf.
taking, there's a
I think
response.
it was his and somebody else's.
Right, there's an emotional response, but you're
Okay.
arguing that emotional response was due to self-defense. So I'm trying to understand how the response of throwing another bottle defends those individuals who are stuck in the middle.
But I understand your question to be, how could he be throwing from the stage to defend somebody who was being struck by the bottles between him and Nate the aggressor, is that correct?
Correct.
Well, I would argue that that very sequence is what establishes that defense. And again, it's a preservation of a defense, which we very much hope we don't need to use.
But in the video, we did see MGM Metro securing Nate Diaz from throwing the bottles at the same time Mr. McGregor was being secured by Mr. Dana White. So I'm trying to understand the self-defense argument here. I'm just trying to understand it and understand the logic of it, that's all. 'Cause I'm confused.
We understand that it took security to restrain Nate Diaz and the others who were throwing. And I understand that others among them are or have been.
I believe I spoke with the individual from MGM Security who was injured, but I believe that was by a can thrown by Mr. McGregor, not from Mr. Diaz.
Was there anybody in the media who was injured? Or?
I'm unaware of anybody being injured.
Okay. And then was anybody in the media participating in the bottle throwing?
I'm not aware of that if anybody was. But I believe they weren't, based upon the evidence that was presented, we've reviewed.
Thank you.
Mr. Gunn, did you say a can was thrown by Mr. McGregor as well?
upon the videos were presented, it was a monster can that was on the stage in front of him. It was
It was a monster can similar to this rock star.
That's correct.
Okay. This weighs about maybe 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds.
Approximately 2.5 pounds is correct.
Are there any other questioners from the commissioners for Jennifer Goldstein?
Mr. Chairman,
Or would there be any questions for Mr. McGregor, who's on the phone?
I do have a question for our AG counsel, and this is more procedural, legal procedural. If they're maintaining the defense of self-defense, but are verbally arguing that they had some culpability in the situation, where do we go?
It would be up to you to weigh that evidence, and you felt whether it mitigated, it would be up to the commission to decide the weight of that or whether or not it was a valid defense, and you could rule upon that.
Okay. But if the defense counsel's arguing two different arguments, one written, one verbal, where do you come out on that?
You would have to, the testimony today is the administrative hearing on this matter, so whatever evidence is introduced today would be what would go forward if they were to appeal the decision.
Okay, so the verbal arguments that are being made today outweigh the written arguments in the complaint?
You would need to get her to clarify her position, and then whatever she, presented today as testimony would control.
I believe Commissioner Martin tried to do that, and I don't think we got an answer on that. Is that my understanding?
I understand it that way.
Okay. I know I'm slow, but it takes me a while to get there. I think I'm just trying to process it. Commissioner Martin, I'd like to know your opinion on, do we take the verbal defense or do we take the written defense?
Once evidence is closed, I will be making a record as far as what I believe, the status of the evidence and at least my interpretation of it.
And Commissioner, if it matters, what will happen is we'll go up on appeal, and the court will factor in that she made both sides of the argument, one written, one verbal, and the court will decide whether the commission had substantial evidence to determine what they determined during the hearing. So again, it's up to you to filter those two arguments and decide which one has merit.
Ms. Goldstein, I should come back to you. Do you want to re-summarize your arguments, or do we want to continue with the testimony that's already been made?
Well, what I'd like to make clear is that we submitted an answer together with our affirmative defenses to preserve the record. At the time, I had conversations with Mr. Gunnell, and we did not know what his recommendation to the commission would be. We only heard that for the first time here today. So if the commission is considering following the recommendations of Mr. Gunnell, then again, our concern isn't with the discipline, our concern of discipline in general. Our concern specifically is whether or not Mr. McGregor is going to be suspended in such a manner that would interfere with his ability to fight in 205. And so I want to assure the commission and the executive director that we did file the answer in good faith as a preservation of the defenses. We do see that the facts as you see them were that people were being hit, and including, for instance, the founder of Paradigm Sports, my company, by bottles thrown by either Nate or his supporters. And so in that regard, we did preserve the affirmative defense of both protection of self and protection of others. And if the question is whether or not we think that he was intending to protect others, is that what the question posed is?
I'm trying to get to reconcile the arguments that are in your written answer and the verbal testimony you've made this morning. I'm trying to understand the two and get a clarification as to what the arguments are.
Which is fair. What transpired is not something that Conor or any of them, I assume, are proud of. We're going to hear from Conor, and perhaps he can better clarify for you exactly what he was feeling and what he was doing in that regard. And then perhaps that will help to lay the foundation for what your questioning toward me is with regard to that affirmative defense.
Thank you. Mr.
Yeah, I will speak for the opportunity.
You will, Mr. McGregor. Please hold one more second here.
Yes.
Is the Attorney General recommending suspension? Because I didn't hear that in your recommendation. All I heard was the fine and the community service and the media training.
No, sir, we're not recommending suspension.
However, it's up to this commission to determine discipline.
Correct. Mr. McGregor, first of all, before you speak, are there any questions from the commissioners specifically for Mr. McGregor?
One of the things I think we may need to do first is to ensure that he is sworn before he gives testimony. Can we do that?
I would recommend it.
Go ahead.
Mr. McGregor, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, Commissioner Limbaugh, do you have any questions for Mr. McGregor?
Mr. McGregor, this is Commissioner Lunbaugh. What I'd like to do is to begin by asking your version. Can you explain to us what happened during the press conference, please?
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to just say thank you for allowing me to be at this event by phone. I appreciate that very much. I'm deep in preparation for my next contest, and I am grateful to be allowed to take this in by phone. So, first off, I want to say thank you for that. Look, I don't want to call defense or anything on this. I just want to apologize for the incident. It was a very unusual instance, that's all unfolded even. I just acted, I acted wrong. And all I can say is I'm sorry, and I will learn from this.
Mr. McGregor, I'm going to go back to my question.
Right.
I'm going to go back to my question, and that is, from your perspective, what happened at the press conference?
You know, look, this was a high stakes fight for me. Fight of my career, so I actually don't know what happened. I was acting very erratically, and it just got out of hand. I don't know. I seen him jump up, he walked off. And walked after mine, and I said, oh, well, so I don't. You don't do this, that. I just want to hold up and apologize to my part and say that that's really all I can say. I mean, even backstage before the fight, when Bennett came to me and he looked at me about the opener, and he said no. And to him about the internet at the press conference, I didn't take it. And I know Mr. Bennett very well, I have a lot for him. And I was upset at myself for not taking that moment to apologize and play my part on the incident. He deserved to hear it from me then. But that was the mindset I was in. This fight had everything on the line for me. This was the highest stakes fight I'd ever been in. And I was in a different mindset. And so all I did was learn from it and learn to handle myself better if I find myself in a situation like that again. And whatever agreement we can come to, and that hopefully to an agreement that aids everyone going forward, and we can do that. But whatever you think I'm in, I'm here, I'm owning up. And I apologize. It's not a great look. I mean,